Hey y'all, welcome to another powerful, brand new story. I really hope you love it, and if you do, make sure to join the fam by hitting that subscribe button and dropping a comment to let us know where you're watching from. Let's dive in.
The grand wedding of Mason Whitmore was the talk of the town. It was the kind of event that filled tabloids weeks before it even happened, an extravagant union between one of the richest bachelors in New York and a model half his age. The guest list was elite, the venue a private estate in the Hamptons, and the purpose, at least for Mason, was more than just love. For him, it was about victory. Mason sat in his sleek office overlooking Manhattan, a smirk playing on his lips as he handed the envelope to his assistant. "Send this one by hand," he said. "I want her to know it's real." The name on the envelope was clear: Emma Carter, his ex-wife. 5 years had passed since their messy divorce. Back then, Emma had left with nothing but her dignity after refusing a generous settlement. Mason had expected her to come crawling back. She never did. That had irritated him more than he'd admit. "You think she'll show up?" asked Peter, Mason's business partner and longtime friend. Mason chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks. "Oh, she will. She's too proud not to. And when she does, she'll see what she lost." He pictured the look on her face when she'd watch him standing beside Marissa, his tall, stunning bride with connections in fashion and fame. He imagined Emma among the crowd, in a plain dress, alone, perhaps even bitter. The thought filled him with a cruel kind of satisfaction. Across the city, in a small apartment above a bookstore, Emma Carter opened the envelope with shaky fingers. She read the glossy invitation 3 times, her heart pounding louder with each word. "Mr. Mason Whitmore and Ms. Marissa Devereaux cordially invite you to celebrate their wedding." She stood frozen by the window, her son playing quietly with building blocks in the background. The boy had golden hair that shimmered in the afternoon sun and eyes as piercing as Mason's. A lump formed in Emma's throat. She hadn't seen Mason since the day she walked away. She'd been pregnant then, a secret she had kept buried for years. Her reasons were complex. Mason's ambition had grown cold, leaving no room for softness, no space for a child raised in warmth rather than gold. Her son, Ethan, was now 4 and full of laughter. He deserved none of this past drama. But part of her wanted Mason to see him. To realize. She folded the invitation and placed it on the table. Her friend Julia, who worked in the shop downstairs, had already read the whole thing through Emma's expression alone. "You're going, aren't you?" Julia asked softly. Emma nodded slowly. "He wants to humiliate me. But I won't let him win. Not like that." The wedding day arrived with sunshine and champagne. The estate buzzed with high society's finest. Strings played under a white canopy as photographers buzzed around like bees. Mason stood near the altar, dazzling in his custom tuxedo. Marissa clung to his arm, radiant and glowing in her designer gown. She was everything that belonged to his new world. But his eyes kept glancing at the entrance. She was late. Typical. Then the crowd near the back shifted, and a silence passed through a few guests. Emma walked in slowly, dressed in a simple, elegant navy blue gown. She wore no diamonds, no designer heels, just quiet grace. And beside her was a small boy, holding her hand tightly, in a vest and tiny bow tie. Mason's chest tightened. The boy's face, his eyes, his expression, the sharp jaw, was a mirror. Time froze. Peter leaned over and whispered, "Is that?" But Mason didn't answer. He couldn't. Marissa followed his gaze and frowned. "Who's she with?" Still, Mason said nothing. The glass of champagne in his hand trembled slightly. His whole world, the one he'd carefully reconstructed, the image he worked so hard to perfect, shuddered. Emma stopped at the edge of the aisle, standing where no one could ignore her. Her eyes met Mason's with strength, not bitterness. She didn't look broken. She looked bold. The boy, Ethan, stared at Mason with curiosity, unaware of the thunderstorm his presence had just brought. And then, he smiled. Mason's breath caught. It was his smile. The crowd whispered. But Emma didn't flinch. She leaned down and whispered something in Ethan's ear. The boy nodded and sat down quietly beside her. Mason couldn't look away. His bride noticed tension crackling in the space between them. The ceremony hadn't even begun, and yet everything had changed. Everything. Mason couldn't focus. Not on the priest, not on Marissa's delicate hand holding his, not even on the sea of guests smiling in anticipation of his perfect wedding. His gaze kept drifting back to the back row, to her. Emma. And the boy sitting beside her. Ethan. He hadn't been introduced, but Mason didn't need anyone to tell him the truth. It was there, etched in every line of the boy's face, in the tilt of his chin, in the color of his eyes. It was like looking in a mirror to his younger self. He'd never known. Emma had never told him. Marissa tugged gently on his hand as the officiant finished his speech and cued the exchange of vows. Mason blinked back to the moment, and reached into his jacket for the folded paper he had written days ago. But the words felt hollow now. Scripted. Empty. He looked down at Marissa, who was smiling beautifully. Everything about her was flawless. And yet, for the first time, he realized how little he knew about her heart. How different that smile was from the one Emma used to wear, warm, real, alive. His throat closed. Still, he forced the words out, his voice steady, but detached. I vow to be the man who protects you, who gives you the life you deserve. In the back row, Ethan fidgeted and leaned closer to Emma. He whispered something, and Emma bent her head down to listen. She smiled softly and nodded, smoothing his golden hair. Mason watched that small moment like a knife twisting in his gut. When it was Marissa's turn, she delivered her vows with elegance, lacing her words with charm and poetic devotion. The guests clapped lightly, moved by the theatrics of it all. But Mason could barely breathe. When the time came for the kiss, he hesitated, just for a second. But Marissa leaned in, sealing it before he could pull away. And just like that, the ceremony was over. The reception unfolded with string music and endless toasts. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and everyone was celebrating. Everyone, except Mason. He searched for Emma and the boy in the crowd, but they had stepped outside into the garden. Without thinking, he excused himself from Marissa's side and followed them. He found them near the rose-covered archway, Ethan playing with a paper plane and Emma watching silently, her hands clasped in front of her. You came, Mason said. She turned slowly. You invited me. He let out a dry chuckle. I didn't think you actually would. I know. Her voice was calm. You wanted me to feel small. To remind me what I lost. Mason stepped closer. Why didn't you tell me? Emma's eyes flicked toward Ethan. Because you weren't the man he needed back then. He didn't deny it. Ethan ran toward them with a grin and held up the paper plane. It flew all the way over the bush, Mommy. Emma knelt down. I saw. You're amazing. Mason knelt, too, uncharacteristically dropping to the boy's level. Hey, buddy. What's your name? Ethan, the boy said proudly. Mason swallowed hard. How old are you, Ethan? I'm 4.5, he replied, holding up 5 fingers before correcting himself. Well, almost. Mason forced a smile, heart pounding. You like airplanes? Ethan nodded. I want to build a real one someday. Emma placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. Why don't you go show Julia your plane? She's right over there. Ethan ran off happily. Silence fell between them. You named him Ethan, Mason said, his voice low. Is he mine? Emma looked away. You already know the answer to that. Why didn't you just tell me? Emma's eyes locked onto his, fierce and honest. Because back then, all you cared about was image. Power. Deals. You didn't see me. You wouldn't have seen him either. Mason's hands curled into fists. Not in anger at her, but at himself. At who he had been. At what he had missed. I've changed, he said softly. Emma nodded. Maybe. But you still invited me to this wedding thinking I was broken. He looked down. You're not. No. I'm stronger than I've ever been. Back inside, Marissa was watching from the window, her champagne untouched. Peter approached, lowering his voice. She said who the kid is? Marissa didn't respond. Emma's not staying much longer. He added. You want us to say something? No, she said coldly. He already said enough by leaving me in here. Her eyes narrowed as she watched her new husband standing in the garden with the woman he once loved, and the child who looked like him. And for the first time, she realized she hadn't won. Not really. Emma gathered her things as the sun began to dip low over the hills. Ethan tugged on her dress. Can we stay longer? She smiled. Not today, sweetie. Mason stepped out again just as she was preparing to leave. Emma, wait, he said, breathless. She turned but didn't speak. Please. Let me get to know him. I don't care what it takes. Her expression softened just slightly. He's not a trophy, Mason. He's a little boy who needs consistency, love, and patience. If you want to be part of his life, it's not just for a weekend. I know. She studied him. Then she said quietly, We'll see. And with that, she took Ethan's hand and walked away into the twilight. Mason stood there, heart pounding, watching the only thing in his life that had ever truly mattered walk away. The reception wound down, and the guests began to leave, glittering dresses trailing across marble floors, laughter echoing into the night. But the warmth of celebration never returned to Mason after Emma left. It felt like the party had moved on without him, even though he was still standing in the center of it. Marissa approached from behind, her heels silent on the grass where he stood frozen. Are you going to tell me who she is? She asked, her voice tight. Mason turned slowly. You know who she is. I know she's your ex-wife. She snapped. But who's the kid? Mason hesitated. My son. Marissa's eyes narrowed. You told me you didn't have any children. I didn't know, Marissa. And now what? She asked bitterly. You're going to run after them? Leave me at our own wedding? This isn't about running away, Mason replied, his voice low. It's about owning up to what I should have known. What I should have been. The air between them crackled with the weight of unspoken truth. I thought I was marrying a man who had left his past behind, she whispered. I thought I had, he said honestly. Emma and Ethan arrived back at their small apartment just past midnight. Ethan had fallen asleep in the car, his arms wrapped around his stuffed fox. Emma carried him gently to his bed, pulling the covers up to his chin and brushing his hair back from his forehead. She sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, watching him breathe. So much had happened. So much could still happen. Her phone vibrated on the table. A text from an unknown number. Mason, please. I want to be part of his life. Tell me what I have to do. She stared at the message. Then turned the phone face down without replying. The next morning, Mason stood in front of his penthouse windows overlooking the city. The view, once his pride, now felt hollow. He hadn't slept. His mind had been replaying Ethan's voice. His laugh. The way he smiled. He was a father. And he hadn't even known it. He walked into the kitchen and found Peter drinking coffee at the island. I screwed up, Mason said simply. Peter raised an eyebrow. That's rare for you to admit. I spent years thinking success meant erasing everything that didn't fit my plan. Emma. Ethan, they didn't fit then. But now? I don't know what matters more. Peter sipped his coffee. So what are you going to do about it? I'm going to earn the right to know him, Mason said. Later that day, Emma found a letter slipped under her door. Handwritten. No assistance. No lawyer tone. Emma. I don't deserve your trust. I know that. But I want to be someone our son can look up to. Not a millionaire. Not a headline. Just a man who shows up. Let me meet him again. No pressure. No lawyers. Just coffee. Just the three of us. Please. Mason asterisk. Emma sat with the letter in her lap, her thumb brushing over the ink. She had protected Ethan for so long. Could she trust Mason not to hurt him? But there was something different in the way he looked at Ethan. Something she'd never seen in his eyes before. They met at a quiet park the next weekend. Emma sat on a bench while Ethan played in the sandbox. Mason stood nearby, wearing a plain gray sweater, no bodyguards, no phone in sight. "Thanks for meeting me," he said cautiously. Emma nodded. "You wanted this. He doesn't know who you are yet." "Not officially." Mason's eyes never left the boy. "I'd like to be his friend first." Emma glanced at him, surprised. He smiled faintly. "The rest can come later. If it's meant to." Ethan looked up and waved. "Hey! Look what I made." They walked over to see his castle. Mason crouched down. "That's incredible, bud." Ethan beamed. "You want to help me build a tower?" Mason looked up at Emma. She gave a silent nod. "Sure," Mason said. "Let's make it the biggest tower here." And together, under the sun, they built something simple, yet more important than any skyscraper Mason had ever constructed. As they left the park, Ethan held both their hands. He swung happily between them, laughing. Mason had never known a sound could fill the hollow spaces in his chest like that. Emma glanced at him, her voice quiet. "He's already asking when he'll see you again." Mason's breath caught. "Whenever he wants. I'll be there." She smiled softly. "We'll take it one step at a time." For the first time, Mason didn't feel like a man who had lost something. He felt like someone who had just begun. The weeks that followed brought changes Mason never expected. For the first time in years, his calendar wasn't dominated by mergers and media appearances. It was filled with park visits, school pickup schedules, and Saturday pancake mornings with Ethan. His penthouse, once sterile and cold, now had action figures scattered across the coffee table, a mini soccer ball in the hallway, and a small pair of sneakers next to his leather boots by the door. Emma hadn't moved in. She didn't need to. Mason wasn't trying to win her back. Not yet. His focus was on the boy who called him Mr. Mason, and asked 100 questions a day, most of which Mason couldn't answer without laughing. But every moment was a gift. One afternoon, as Ethan built Lego cities in Mason's living room, the boy suddenly looked up and asked, "Are you my dad?" Mason froze. Emma had said she would explain it to him when the time was right, but it seemed Ethan had sensed it himself. He moved slowly to sit beside Ethan on the carpet. "Yeah, buddy," he said quietly. "I am." Ethan studied him carefully. "Does that mean I get to call you Dad?" Mason's throat tightened. "Only if you want to." Ethan nodded. "I think I do." Then he went back to building, just like that, as if he'd asked what time dinner was. Mason sat there for a long time, stunned by how something so monumental had been handled with the ease only a child could bring. Emma was cautious, but she noticed it too. Ethan had a glow about him now. A confidence that wasn't there before. Mason never missed a single weekend, never showed up late, and never forgot anything important. He was present. Still, Emma held her heart back. She hadn't forgotten who Mason used to be, the man obsessed with power, image, and control. But this Mason, the one reading bedtime stories and asking about school projects, was someone new. One evening, Mason invited them both to dinner at his estate. "Just a small thing," he promised. "A private chef, nothing fancy." Emma laughed. "That sentence only makes sense coming from you." Still, she agreed. The table was set in warm lights, with Ethan's favorite foods, mac and cheese, grilled cheese sandwiches cut in stars, and a mini chocolate cake with sprinkles. Mason had even swapped his usual tailored suit for a soft sweater and jeans. Ethan giggled at the sight of the stars. "Mom never cuts my sandwiches like that." Mason grinned. "Guess I'll have to teach her." They sat around the table like a real family, laughter filling the room as Ethan told stories from preschool, including how he tried to hide crayons in his socks once. When Ethan excused himself to get his stuffed fox from the couch, Emma leaned back and looked around. "You've changed," she said softly. Mason met her gaze. "I had to." I looked at him, and I saw more than a reflection, I saw a second chance. Emma played with the rim of her glass. "He adores you." "I adore him," Mason replied. "And I care about you too, Emma." "I never stopped." She looked away. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I do," he said gently. "But I'm not asking for anything. Just this. Moments like this. The three of us." She nodded slowly. "We'll see where it goes." Just then, Ethan ran back into the room and climbed onto Mason's lap. "Can I stay over tonight?" Mason glanced at Emma, seeking her permission. She paused, then smiled. "Only if you brush your teeth and get in bed by 9. "Yes," Ethan cheered, throwing his arms around both of them. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, Emma didn't feel like the struggling single mom, and Mason didn't feel like the powerful man afraid of connection. They felt like a family. Later that night, Mason stood by Ethan's bed, watching him sleep. The boy looked peaceful, hugging his stuffed fox tightly. Emma joined him quietly. "He talks about you all the time." Mason smiled. "I talk about him, too. Even when no one's listening." She laughed under her breath. He turned to her. "Do you ever think, maybe this happened for a reason? That we were supposed to find our way back?" Emma looked at him, her heart softening. "I don't know what the future looks like, Mason," she said honestly. "But I do know you've given Ethan something he'll never forget." "And what about you?" Emma hesitated. Then she whispered, "We'll see." They stood in silence, side by side, watching over the boy who had unknowingly brought them together again. The seasons shifted. Fall painted the city in golds and reds, and Mason's life changed in quiet, beautiful ways. Gone were the endless investor meetings and cocktail parties. Now, Saturdays were for soccer games and school art fairs, where Ethan beamed when Mason cheered louder than anyone. Sundays were for grocery runs with Emma, for laughter in the cereal aisle and quiet moments in the parking lot when their fingers brushed. The world saw Mason Rivers as a millionaire. But Ethan just saw him as Dad. And that mattered more than anything. One cool afternoon, Mason sat on the couch, helping Ethan glue construction paper wings onto a cardboard airplane. Emma came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "There's a family event at Ethan's school next week," she said. "A little performance. He's playing a cloud." Mason smiled. "That sounds adorable. I'll be there." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? You've got that Westbridge board meeting that morning." He didn't even hesitate. "Then the meeting will have to wait." Emma studied him for a moment, searching his face for the old man she used to know, the one who put money before memories, ego before love. But he wasn't there. She sat beside him. "You've really become his hero, you know." Mason looked down at his son, who was now pretending the cardboard plane was flying through the sky. "He became mine first." At Ethan's school play, Mason arrived early, flowers in one hand, camera in the other. He sat in the front row beside Emma, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. When Ethan appeared on stage with a cotton ball hat and a giant smile, Mason stood up without realizing and waved like crazy. Emma laughed, pulling him back down. The children sang, they danced, and Ethan shouted his one line loud and proud. "I'm the happiest cloud in the sky." Afterward, they met him outside, where Mason handed him the flowers. "These are for you, little man. You were amazing." Ethan grinned. "Thanks, Dad." The words still made Mason's heart swell every time. Later that evening, back at Emma's apartment, Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in his cloud costume. Emma tucked a blanket around him. Mason stood quietly, hands in his pockets, watching. She turned to him. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Mason nodded. "I'd like that." They ate on the floor, picnic style. Pizza. Simple. Laughing about how Ethan thought clouds were made of whipped cream. Halfway through the meal, Emma grew quiet. What is it? Mason asked. She met his eyes. He's starting to ask if we're a family. Mason held his breath. Emma continued. I told him yes, just a different kind of family. Mason swallowed. Is that what we are? She didn't answer immediately. Then, it could be. Hope bloomed in his chest like spring. I never wanted to hurt you, Emma. But I know I did. She nodded slowly. You did. And I built a life without you. But now, you've become someone I never expected. He reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. You gave him a father, she said softly. And you gave me back someone I once loved. Mason looked at her, eyes full. Maybe this time we do it right. She smiled through the tears. Maybe we already are. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Ethan ran into the bedroom they now all shared, laughing, leaping onto the bed between them. Wake up! He shouted. It's pancake day! Mason groaned playfully. Ugh, not pancakes again! Emma laughed, pulling the covers over her head. Then you're making them this time, Dad? Mason threw up his hands. Fine, but only if Ethan's my sous chef. Deal! The boy grinned. As the three of them headed to the kitchen, sunlight pouring through the windows, Mason looked at them both and smiled. This wasn't the life he thought he wanted. It was better.